Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at puremtgo.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructiveCriticism.com.
106 of the Common Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Christian, and as always, I'm joined by my incredible co-host, Colton. How are you doing tonight, Colton?
Just fine. How about yourself, Christian?
Doing pretty okay. Before we get too far into this episode, I just wanted to remind everyone that Common Knowledge and all of the podcasts on the Constructive Criticism Network are sponsored by puremtgo.com. If you guys wanted to support the show, you can like, share, and subscribe to the Constructive Criticism YouTube channel, and check out our Patreon. With all that out of the way, let's get on to the podcast.
All right, so the first thing we wanted to do this week is, as most of you know, as we talked about last week, we had a poll for a $20-ish budget deck in Pauper. We're doing $20 in paper, primarily because as I've looked through prices, paper cards in Pauper tend to be a little more stable than MTGO, just because of how the MTGO economy works. So I went with paper just because I didn't want to make a deck and then suddenly you guys see it and then you're like, oh, it's over 20. It went from 15 to 40 ticks overnight, and sometimes that can happen, and I just didn't want that to seem as bad. So anyway, with that out of the way, we did get 24 votes on our poll, which was really super awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I did include the optional Twitter handle question in there just to kind of gauge viewer interest in this type of thing. And early on, Blackburn was the favorite, but in the end, Golgari Aristocrats was able to pull it out with 9 votes, and Blackburn was close behind at 7 votes. So it looks like we'll be working on Aristocrats for the next couple weeks.
Heck yeah, I'm super excited to get things going and see what sorts of decks we can ride into the dust together.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, I guess the next thing that we should talk about is what decks we're playing right now. The Golgari Aristocrats deck will be the deck that I'll definitely be playing over the next couple of weeks because of the poll. But this past week, I've been still toying around with Bone Picker decks. This time I was playing with the blue-black control list that we had talked about. Even then, it still felt like maybe a powerful card that just didn't belong in that deck. So I'm probably just going to try it in a mono black shell or something next time around. What about yourself?
I was actually trying out some of the ones in our poll. The two ended up being the closest, and that was Aristocrats and Blackburn. Mostly just trying to figure out the budget and what I thought would be the best cards for that deck, because the decks that I pulled, most of the ones, at least for now, that I've been pulling, I've been creating kind of a stockpile of MTGO lists from Goldfish, and I've just been kind of picking them from my stockpile of lists. So I've been kind of going through and figuring out how the deck works and what it really wants to do to try to prepare for the upcoming week.
Heck yeah. Did you find anything exciting about the old Golgari Aristocrats decks?
I really like the grindy value that the decks can give you, especially in a more black heavy meta right now, because people are playing around with more Bone Pickers and cast downs. So I'm just having a bunch of cards that are just inherent 2-for-1s, and cards that can do things when they get killed, like your Serrated Scorpions. Your opponent kills it with a 1 or 2 mana removal spell, and you still get to dome them for 2, and that's still it's a pretty good trade. So I think in this current meta where people are playing around with more black decks and people are playing more Tron, and you have a couple ways to just eke out those last couple points, I think the deck is is a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for.
For sure. Like I said, I'm pretty excited to play it. Um, I guess with all of that stuff out of the way, we can move on to our main topic for the week. So what I did is I had built a spreadsheet basically ranking all of the decks in Pauper based on Pauper challenge results. This time around, we did the last 4 challenges, so the last 2 weeks worth of results. And we had sort of assigned points based on like top 32 finishes. So for first place, you get 6 points. Second place, you get 5. Top 4 is 4. Top 8 is 3 points. Top 16 is 2 points. And then top 32 is 1 point. And we sort of came away with some interesting results and some incredibly predictable results. But so the rankings were as followed, just from 1 to 12. Is Tron led the way over the 4 challenges with 43 points total. And then the Boros and Mardu Monarch decks had 35 points. And then the Dimir Delver Fairies decks were pretty close behind at 33 points. And then in 4th place, we had Mono Green Aggro, and there was sort of like a gap here at only 25 points. Then under that, we had Burn at 19. And then we had a tie for 6th place with Is It Fairies and Flicker, both taking 18 points. And then Affinity decks, and I just combined Teamer and Jeskai Affinity here, had 12 points. And then Walls Combo had 9 points, but it is worth pointing out that all of that happened in one event, and it didn't have any other placements in any other events. And then behind that, we had Slivers with 7 points. And then in 10th place, we sort of had like a hodgepodge of Mono Blue Delver, Mono Black Control, Boggles, and Elves, all with 6 points. And then below that, we had Heroic, Red Deck Wins, and Pestilence with 3 points. So there's sort of a lot to go through here. Colton, I'm not sure if there was like an exact place that you wanted to start, just from the top down or anything like that.
What was your biggest surprise on this list?
So I guess there were 2 to me. The first one is that I had sort of gotten the feeling from just like poking around the internet and playing games and like listening to like what people had to say, that a lot of people thought that like the Jeskai and Blue White Flicker decks were incredibly powerful and just very good. Basically hated Ephemerate and thought that that deck might even be better than Tron. But like just looking at the results, it doesn't play out that way. You know, it certainly like didn't do bad, but like it doesn't play out like it's like based on these numbers, it doesn't look like it's just like this huge problem in the format or anything like that. So
yeah, I think the non-Tron Flicker decks now are just kind of fine. They're not super busted. They're kind of annoying to watch them do their thing, but it's not like the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, for sure. And outside of that, I had pretty much one other one, and maybe like my personal bias here is showing a little bit, because I sort of think that it might have secretly been this way for a while. Dimir Delver sort of emerging as like the top Delver decks. As you look, so the past 4 challenges early on, so in like the first 2 from 2 weeks ago, Is It Fairies and Dimir Fairies were sort of like neck and neck on which ones were having the best results and most popular. But then this past weekend, Dimir sort of took over being like the top Fairies and Delvers deck. And I'd be very interested to see if that continues. To see if like it's just like a mixture of like Cast Down just makes that archetype a little bit more better and it might be better positioned because it plays more like a control deck, or what exactly?
Yeah, I feel like people are starting to play around more with bone pickers and mold drifters and stuff. And I think that's part of the reason why is just getting some of those upgrades in Double Masters. People are starting to look at that deck more. And I feel like against this against a more defined meta, if you know like what your what your removal is supposed to target and what's supposed to kill. Since we did kind of have a little bit of a shakeup with some new cards in Double Masters, that like the more tempo style decks will take advantage of people just trying different weird things that can kind of be knocked off pretty easily. But then once people figure out like a solid, this is what I'm going to do, then it's a little bit harder for those Izzet decks to keep knocking people off tempo, and it's a little bit easier for those blue-black decks to just kind of use, to figure out what removal they have to play.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. There were tons of interesting things just like going through the data that I found. One of these other things that I like, I don't know if it was like shocking to me, but like I was honestly stumped as to like what the reason was. And that was like the differences between the Saturday challenges and the Sunday challenges. The notable one to me is that Burn and Red Deck Wins had incredibly dominant Sundays. So they scored collectively 22 points, but 21 of those points were scored on Sunday challenges. Whereas Tron seemed to like pick up the slack on Saturday, putting up like 12 top 32 finishes on Saturdays versus just 6 on Sundays. So literally double the number. And I don't know if it's maybe just like people play Tron less on Sunday or whatever, and so Burn has a better time, or if maybe like they're more like talented like Burn and Red Deck Win pilots on Sundays, and maybe that's a good way to fight Tron. I'm not quite sure what that means. It was just something notable to me that definitely stood out when looking through stuff.
Quick question on that. So we know that. So what? A lot of this I found with different challenges is some people will play two to three challenges a day, just across different formats.
Mm-hmm.
And so people, if they're double queuing for challenges, or they plan to play 2 challenges a day, will often pick aggro decks so they can get through their games faster. And then on days that they don't double queue, people will pick a slower deck, if that makes sense, because otherwise you're just sitting between rounds kind of doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that may have something to do with it. I'm not sure what all the challenges are that are run on both days. I haven't played a challenge in a little bit, honestly. So I don't know what I haven't seen what the other schedules are, but I think that may have something to do with it, because I know a lot of people that like to play the Pauper Challenge also like to play the Modern and especially the Legacy Challenge, just because of the more similar style of gameplay. So that I think that just people's deck choices, just for either they're double queuing or not double queuing, may have something to do with it. But that's just my educated guess from what I've seen people play on. From my experience from people on Twitter saying, "Oh, I'm going to try to play the Modern and then Legacy Challenge, so I'm going to play a really fast combo deck," and then Sunday they're like, "Oh, I'm going to play just Pauper," and then they'll just play Tron, or the other way around, whatever happens. They happen to play that week.
Yeah. So something sort of based off of what you were saying is that it is worth noting that the Saturday Pauper Challenge tends to start really early. And by really early, I mean 2 a.m. Pacific. Whereas the Sunday Challenge starts at, I want to say it's either 10 or 11 a.m. Pacific. So it could also be that because like there's a longer day ahead of you with the Saturday Challenge, people are more likely to just pilot those control decks.
Mm-hmm. Or it could also be that people, because I know that they try to split up the time so that people in different time zones can play, the challenges. So maybe it could just be people in different time zones like to play control decks more than aggro decks, and you never know.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. It's hard for me to tell how significant that is, except for maybe like if you plan on playing a Sunday challenge, you sort of consider bringing in like extra burn hate or whatever.
Hmm.
Whenever you're figuring out what to play.
I think this is something we'll definitely have to watch over the next couple of months to see if this is a consistent thing.
Oh yeah, for sure. What about you? Were there any like sort of, I guess, like storylines or whatever that like you had seen?
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, just like things like from looking at it and stuff that like maybe you thought were interesting or wanted to talk about, anything like that.
I thought it was kind of interesting that that Walls has been doing as well as it's been doing recently. Um, I think it can partially. I'm not going to say it's completely, but I don't. I would say that having there have been some people that have been bringing more attention to the deck recently. Most notably, for me, has been Scott from Budget Magic Cast over in Ireland. Um, he talks a lot about the deck and how much fun he's been having. He he bought the whole deck as kind of a goldfish style deck where he just kind of sits down and just plays around with it, kind of like I like to do a lot with Storm. You're just trying to like try to figure out combos while you're sitting there bored.
Mm-hmm.
And for in quarantine when you can't do it as much with paper decks, I think it's a deck that more people have been started picking up because they're like, oh, I can try to actually have time to try to figure out how do all these pieces work together. And I don't know, I'm not sure if that's like totally the case, but I don't think it hurt the deck at all.
Yeah, for sure. I think like with decks like Walls as well, and I think we sort of saw it in the past with the cycling decks, that whenever people sort of pick up like things pick up popularity, there also appears to be like a correlation with like how well they do, and that like seems like pretty obvious, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I would be very interested to see like maybe like once Walls stops becoming like one of like the like cool things in Pauper, whether or not it can keep up like putting up consistent results and things like challenges and leagues.
Yeah. The other one that kind of surprised me is that Heroic just fell off the face of the planet, it feels like. Because Mono White was one of the probably one for a while was one of the after especially after Theros came out was one of the top 4 decks. I was top 4 or 5 decks in Pauper, I would say. And now it's kind of just fallen off the face of the earth.
Yeah, it would be interesting to like try and figure out why that is. I don't know if it's because like maybe just like the tools that like people sort of going to the Dimir decks over the Izzet decks gave them better tools to fight Mono White. And then Tron, from what I understand, always had like a pretty decent matchup. And then maybe like the Boros decks can just out mid-range them while still like gumming up the board. Like it makes sense to me, but also it's sort of like honestly it's disheartening because I really like that deck. But
Yeah. I think the deck is good, but I think especially when Mono Black kind of came back as a way as people were trying to figure out ways to beat Tron, and Mono Black I feel like just because it has so many ways to kill dudes and make you sacrifice dudes, just natural, and it has a ways to gum up the board with little cheap dudes that will draw cards and whatever, and just ping down your small guys. That it had a naturally good matchup, and like and decks that just can play a lot of black cards in general can kind of eat up your board really quickly, and then it can also tend to have good ways to nuke your yard too, so they can get rid of the Sentinel Eyes permanently. So like the advantage that the deck was having with having the Sentinel Eyes and some other cards in the deck that could be brought back was people have figured out ways to make sure that they don't get quite as much advantage from the graveyard anymore.
for sure, and honestly, I'm glad that you brought up Mono Black because you also reminded me of something else that I wanted to sort of touch on. And that was that, like between Mono Black Control, Mono Blue Tempo, the Affinity decks, sort of like what I would consider like the older pillars of the format. Like it's been this way for a while, but it sort of feels like they're slipping, but trying to hold on. The 3 decks that I mentioned combined for, I believe, 24 points over the 4 events, which obviously could be worse, but it's still definitely not the best. And it's just crazy to think of like how much the format has changed since I started playing it, to where now it appears to be more like Blue Black Delver and Tron and Monarch. Now, granted, there are still some like old pillars of the format that are around, but it appears that these ones are slipping, sort of.
Yeah, I feel like with some of the bannings that Wizards has handed down over the past probably 18 months, plus the printing of cards in the format that are good other than the color blue and in the color red, has been really, really helpful to the format as a whole to be more diverse. I mean, I love me some blue decks. I will play blue decks all day long, but not everyone enjoys it, and sometimes it can get really, really tiring to play blue mirrors all the time. Whether that be control or tempo or even aggro, like whatever, it gets it. It has kind of, with Wizards printing more cards and then kind of nerfing other decks. It's brought more balance overall, I feel like, to the Pauper format. Because for years, blue was king. Because you got to play all these busted blue cards like Gush and Daze and Gataxian Probe, and oh boy, those are some real good Magic cards. Let me tell you, free cards are good.
So yeah, those are all definitely good. And you brought up another thing that I think is very important to mention, is that Pauper appears to be like pretty well balanced right now. I mean, like between, I would say, like the top 6 or 7 decks, they're all sort of within striking distance of each other. That like if maybe you swap like one deck's first place finish for just like a finish somewhere else in the top 32, and take a finish from like lower on in the top 32 to a first place finish, you could easily see decks drop like maybe 1 or 2 spots in the power rankings, and other decks sort of rise. So everything appears to be pretty balanced, which is always a good thing.
It's perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
Yeah. Then another thing that was sort of surprising to me, well, I guess not super surprising given how just like the games play out, I guess, and how good I think the deck is that Monarch is sort of like going into that like Jund Pauper role that maybe Mono Black Control used to have. And what I mean by that is every event it scored at least 6 points, which basically meant that it was like super consistent at putting up good finishes, even if it didn't like take home the top spot or anything like that.
Yeah, I feel like in a lot of ways, Monarch kind of solved some of the problems that Mono Black has. Now, I love playing Mono Black, but the biggest issue I've always had playing Mono Black is that you hurt your own life total a lot. And sometimes that can really, really come back to bite you. And it's happened to me. It's happened to every Mono Black player. And Monarch can gain advantage. And I don't think it can gain quite as much card advantage as Mono Black, but at the same time, it's doing it more consistently. It's a slower engine, but it can more consistently get you cards, and at the same time, you're also not pinging yourself to death trying to get more cards and more advantage. Because like you're taking damage from every time you're taking damage from your Quombaj Witches, you're taking damage from your Fire Action Rager, you're taking damage from Sign in Blood. So most everything you're casting is costing you a couple life, and over the course of the game, that 5, 6, 7 life can eventually add up in a long grind game. And Monarch, you're not really doing that to yourself.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And Monarch can also, in the long game, just like slowly grind out a couple more cards than Mono Black can.
Yeah. So if looking at the results and stuff, let's say that in 2 or 3 days you were going to be playing a challenge either on Saturday or Sunday, what decks would you be considering, and which ones do you think you would play? And is there like any like special like tuning or anything to them that you would do?
So my picks for a challenge honestly really depends on first of all how long I expect to be playing said challenge, and how and how long I believe games in this format will take. So, for instance, if I'm expecting myself to go really deep in a tournament, I tend to play a faster deck. Why? Because I don't like being hungry. And as someone who I used to before I played Magic, I used to grind a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh events, and I would play 9-10 rounds, and I learned that playing the control deck meant that by round 6 or 7, a lot of people who were playing said control deck started to lose out simply because they were losing focus because of being hungry or being thirsty or not having enough time to go to the bathroom between rounds. Because if you're going to time all the time, you don't really have time to go to the bathroom or do those things. So that's my opinion. I try to play a faster deck in those kind of circumstances. Now, if it's something where you have like plenty of time, I will play I'll tend to play a more uh, control deck, but playing control deck means you make more decisions, and it means your brain will hurt more. So that's just simply my advice. If you're going into a challenge for the first time or for your first couple times, I would take a fast deck, and eventually once you get used to the pace, then you can play a slower deck, like a mid-range or a control deck. Because a mid-range or a control deck really tests your stamina in multiple rounds. It tests your stamina over multiple rounds.
Oh yeah, for sure. That makes sense to me. And another thing that I would just wanted to add to that is if you were somebody that was like planning on playing a challenge, not just Pauper but in any format, please make sure that like in between rounds, like you are taking breaks to like eat and stuff. I don't know. I've seen like a lot of people sort of like either not eat when going through events or anything like that, and like you might not think it affects your play, but I promise it does.
Oh, it most certainly does. The one time I topped a large Yu-Gi-Oh event, I made sure to play. It was like a control deck, but it was similar to playing like Ensnaring Bridge Go kind of deck. So it was really quick to set up. So whereas the other deck that I had the option of was more of an interactive kind of mid-rangey deck, and I played that deck in the one before, and as the rounds went by, I felt like I didn't have enough time to go to the bathroom. I didn't have enough time to go eat. I didn't have time to do whatever. So I switched to the deck that didn't quite win the fastest, but locked my opponent out, so they just conceded faster. So that improved my overall ability to play because I didn't have to play as much, and I was able to, have enough time to drink water, have enough time to eat, have enough time to go to the bathroom, and those things are extremely important in playing something like a Pauper challenge.
Oh yeah, those things are important for sure. I think if it were me, sort of looking on stuff, I have like two or three decks that like I think are like really good choices if your goal is to win. Obviously, like play like whatever you think is fun because that will ultimately like make the event best for you regardless of how you place. But if I were trying to win, I think my number one pick would probably be Tron. It has the number one spot in the power rankings, and a lot of people think it's just the best deck in the format. I tend to agree. I think it does some things that no other decks in the format are capable of doing. So that would be like my number one pick. And then the next two decks are sort of tied to me. And it's between the Dimir Fairies deck and Mono Green Aggro. Both of these decks have been putting up pretty consistent results. I would say that if you weren't concerned, didn't care if you won, but still wanted to give yourself a good chance top 8, and like Colton wanted to play something a little bit faster, I would go with Mono Green Aggro. But if you were going to go with the deck that played slower, and maybe had a few more interesting decision points, I would probably play the Fairies deck. But like if I had just had to rank it, it would probably go Tron, Mono Green Aggro, Fairies.
Yeah. So I would say picking the deck really depends a lot on how well and how deeply you know the format. If you know really well how to play the Tron deck or the Dimir Fairies deck, and you know what to expect against each matchup and what you need to do against each matchup, I would say those would be my 1 and 2 picks. If you do not know what you're going to play against so much, and or you don't know the format as deeply as some other players, I would recommend playing Mono Green or Burn first. Burn, especially if you played a lot of other formats, other Eternal formats, because it plays pretty much the same way as what you'd expect from a mono red aggro deck. Play dudes, swing, throw burn spells. So it's a deck that if you played other formats before, if you played Standard or Pioneer, Modern, whatever, it's pretty easy to come in and like know what your deck is going to do and know how to execute your game plan. So yeah, if you know how to play the deck, and if you know the format, Dimir or Tron, if you're just kind of, this is your first time playing a Pauper Challenge, first of all, or if you're a little bit newer to the format, I'd recommend Mono Green or Burn, because they do the play lots of dudes, swing at face for Mono Green, play big dudes, swing at face, and then Mono Red is play some little dudes, swing at face, throw burn spells, and it doesn't require as much format knowledge to navigate the deck.
Yeah, all that is incredibly true, and I think pretty solid advice. So did you have anything else to say about our main topic for the week? Anything that maybe you wanted to add?
No, I think that was pretty much it.
Alrighty, then I guess we can sort of get on to what cards we think should be sideboarded, especially with this newfound knowledge that we have after going back through the past couple of challenges.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you have for your pick?
So for my pick, after kind of reading over the spreadsheet that Christian made up, I picked a kind of interesting card that you often will see in the main deck, and then some people will play in the sideboard. And I think that this is a pretty good card that if you're playing black, is often main deckable, and also a really good sideboard choice if you just don't have enough room in your 6D. And that's Echoing Decay. So Echoing Decay is an instant for 1 and a black. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn, and all the creatures with that same name also get -2/-2. And the reason I picked this card is specifically because we saw Dimir Delver / Fairy decks. We still see Izzet. We saw some Sliver decks pop up, and what was the other one? Oh, and Burn. And that card can, oftentimes get you a 1-for-1. And against those decks and against decks that play a lot of small creatures like elves and slivers and stuff, you can sometimes get yourself a 2-for-1. And getting a 2 or 3-for-1, especially against like say Dimir Delver, if you manage to knock out 2 Delvers or a couple of Bone Pickers or whatever, or if you manage to knock out a couple of Fairies from the air against Izzet or black or blue-black, can be really, really big game and can really knock them off tempo.
Yeah, for sure. I would say Echoing Decay is a strong card, and like you said, it's probably even main deckable.
Mm-hmm. I've played it main in blue black, and I've played it mostly in the sideboard of other black decks.
I think that makes sense to me. I might also play it like as a 1-of in the main deck of like mono black or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I actually had 2 cards this week, sort of depending on what day you wanted to fight on, I guess. So if you wanted to play on the Saturdays, where maybe Tron was a little bit better, and like you just wanted to sort of like get under them, like maybe was happening on those Sundays, I would play probably an aggro deck. And if I did that, I would be sort of concerned about losing out to the mid-range decks, like Monarch, stuff like that. So I would want to have a card like Relic of Progenitus in my sideboard, because a lot of those decks sort of use the graveyard as like their value engines to sort of beat you in the mid-game. So I think even though like it deviates from your main game plan, it's powerful enough to be stopping what they're doing that I would definitely consider playing that in the sideboard of my aggro decks. And then if you wanted to play a Tron deck or like a control deck, I would sort of be considering like Weather the Storm, just because Burn is doing very, very well on Sunday. And having a good way to stop that seems very valuable to me.
Mm-hmm. Life gain is really, really good against the mono red deck.
Yeah, that's true. Surprise.
Yeah. It turns out when you can trade your one card for 2 to 4 of their cards, it's pretty decent.
That being said, that also means that if you're planning on playing Burn, maybe you should put Flaring Pain in your sideboard, but I digress.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I guess with that out of the way, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Common Knowledge. If you guys wanted to get in touch with us, you can find me on Twitter at JustGuyDad, and you can find Colton on Twitter at SnapBoltBaral, or you can shoot us an email over at commonknowledgemtg@gmail.com. If you guys have any questions on the Pauper format, MTGO, or anything else, you can email us or leave a comment. Thanks again to our sponsor, PureMTGO.com, as well as the Constructive Criticism Network for letting us be a part of it. And last, but certainly not least, be good to each other, and thank you all for listening.
Thanks, everyone.